Your hand hovers over the kitchen wall phone. The house is quiet enough to hear the clock working. Dishes drying in the rack. A TV murmuring somewhere down the hall. The cord hangs there like a leash, long enough to reach the hallway, not long enough to disappear. It wasn't the technology that made it intense. It was the fact that you couldn't hide. Because once you dialed, you couldn't take yourself back. You're about to be a voice. A real one. If you ever dated before texting, before DMs, before being able to disappear, you already know this feeling. This wasn't about romance. It was about what contact cost. The courage wasn't the words, it was being heard. And by the end of this, you'll understand why it shaped you. Because back then, trying had witnesses. People could hear it. People could see it. And once you tried, you had to live in the same world afterward. That does something to a person. The number, scribbled on a scrap of notebook paper, is in your hand. You've memorized it, but you still stare at it anyway. Like if you stare long enough, the number itself might tell you what to say. The cord stretches toward the hallway, and you can sense the witnesses. A parent awake, a sibling passing through. Someone will remember you made this call. So you keep your voice steady. You keep it normal. You try not to sound like you care too much. Then you dial, and the line is busy. Not failed, not unavailable, just busy. Which means someone is in there, somewhere, hearing a different voice. And you're standing in your own kitchen, exposed, waiting. Or maybe you're on the other end of it, sitting there, pretending you're not listening for the ring. And that reveals another pressure underneath all of it. Because there's one phone line. If it rings, someone else might pick it up. If you're on too long, someone will need it. And if you miss the moment, you don't get it back by rewinding anything. You just missed it. Back then, contact had weight. Not because the past was cleaner, not because people were better, but because the attempt lived in the world. You didn't get to curate a version of yourself first. You said hello, and that was you. It could be heard. It could be repeated. And once you tried, you couldn't pretend you hadn't. And that constraint, that scarcity, was doing something to you. Maybe you called to ask them out. Maybe you called just to hear their voice. Maybe it was simpler than that. What was the homework? Can I get a ride to work tomorrow? Are we all meeting up later? Whatever it was, you were putting yourself out there. And there was no taking it back. So here's what matters. If a single phone call could carry that much consequence, what else had to be true in the world for that to happen? Because if you understand what the phone required, you understand what dating required, what existing required. It wasn't just the phone. It was the whole environment around the phone. Back then, dating didn't begin inside a private bubble. It began inside places where other people existed, and other people had eyes. You didn't just reach out. You entered the system. On a phone call, a parent might answer. A roommate could be sitting 10 feet away. A sibling may be lingering in the doorway for no reason at all. Back then, people were hard to get. They were surrounded by gates. Sometimes the first voice you heard wasn't theirs. It was whoever was near the phone. Hello? A pause. Who is this? Not harsh, not villainous, just real. Because courtship, whatever form it took in your town, your class, your rules, wasn't treated like a solo project. It was social, which meant the attempt had witnesses before it ever had momentum. And what effect do you think those witnesses had on you? It made you measure your voice. It made you choose your words. It made you understand immediately that your desire wasn't invisible. Remember, there was irreversibility to all this. You couldn't undo any of it. You didn't get to take 10 swings from a safe distance and delete 9 of them. If you said something clumsy, it didn't vanish. It lived. It echoed. You learned to live with what you said, how you acted. It was all real. It was you laid bare at a vulnerable moment. So before you ever dialed, you prepared. Not by crafting the perfect line, by imagining the failure. You sat on your bed and ran the whole conversation in your head. What if her dad picks up? What if she sounds annoyed? What if there's a long silence and you can't think of what to say next? You weren't practicing confidence. You were practicing recovery. How to sound normal when your voice wants to shake. How to end the call without sounding crushed if she says she's busy. This wasn't neuroticism. It was rational preparation for a system that didn't let you undo mistakes. The rehearsal was part of the cost. And I'm not saying we should go back. That's just how it was. It's just a description of the rules. See, that limitation prepared you in a way you didn't realize. Because you couldn't backspace, you learned to think before you spoke. You held the sentence in your mouth for an extra second, not to be perfect, just to be ready to own what happened after. The system was a one-shot economy more often than people admit, not because you only had one chance at love, but because you didn't have endless low-cost attempts. You had a limited number of moments where it made sense to try. A hallway between classes. A break room after a shift. A ride home after practice. A booth at a diner where everyone ends up after the game. Places did the matchmaking, not apps, not profiles. Proximity. You met people because the world put you near them over and over until one day you had enough familiarity to risk contact. And when you risked it, you had to do it without a safety net. That's where the waiting comes in. You'd call, you'd leave a message with someone else, or you'd hang up and try again later. Or you'd just wait until you saw them where you always saw them. And the waiting didn't feel poetic. It felt like a stomachache. Because you couldn't instantly confirm what you meant to them. You couldn't soothe yourself with a constant stream of signals. You had to tolerate not knowing. And the world kept moving while you pretended to watch TV. But really, you were listening for the ring. You walked past the window like it was casual, hoping every slow car was them. Not because you were dramatic. Because trying meant living with not knowing after you hung up. And you had to sit with it, without fixing it. And inside that time, you rehearsed. Not in a heroic way, in a practical way. You replayed the sentence. You weighed the risk. You decided if you could handle the no. Friction was the teacher. Because any attempt followed you into the next day. You still had to see them, in the hallway, in the parking lot, at the grocery store with your mom. So whatever happened didn't stay in your head. You had to carry it back into the same places. If it went well, people could feel it. If it didn't, you still had to walk in like you belonged there. And that didn't land the same for everyone. But the rule was the rule. You couldn't disappear after you tried. That's why chance felt bigger back then. Not because life was more magical, because your worlds overlapped. Proximity kept putting you in each other's path. Same few spots, same few moments where you could take your next shot. And if you missed one, you didn't replace it with 10 more attempts that night. You just lived with the not knowing. That's what made it courage. You couldn't hide in the middle. So what did this train in you before you ever got what you wanted? Waiting trained patience. Being seen trained restraint. Not because anyone was trying to be noble, because the system charged you up front. You're back in that kitchen again. Number in your hand. Cord stretching. House too quiet. And you realize something simple. This costs. The nerves cost. The witnesses cost. The fact that you'll still see them tomorrow costs. So you didn't spend that kind of terror on someone you kind of liked. You only went in when it felt worth it, worth the risk of being overheard, worth the chance of looking stupid, worth walking into the same place tomorrow with your face still on. Friction acted like a filter, not for perfect love, but for sincerity, because it's hard to fake intensity when you have to pay for it in public. Then comes the part nobody romanticizes. Rejection. The silence on the line gets so heavy you can hear the static. A maybe that lands like a punch. And here was the kicker. You couldn't block them. You still had to walk into the building the next morning. Same hallway, same air. And living like that, it gave you a kind of public armor. Not because you were harder than anyone now, because you had to hang up, swallow it, and walk back into the room like a person. You learned you could survive a no, because the day kept going. You had to pass the spot where you always pass them. Locker, break room, lunch line, doesn't matter. You're holding your tray, or your coffee, staring at the back of their head, and they know you're there. That proximity trained something in you, a poker face, a steadier voice, a way to swallow the humiliation without poisoning the room with it. You learned how to lose and remain a person in shared space. And when it did work, when someone said yes, that same system trained follow-through. You had to show up like you meant it, because a porch light wasn't just decoration. It was a contract. If you said 7 o'clock and you weren't there by 7:05, you weren't just disappointing a date. You were disappointing the whole house. A parent in the living room window, a glance at a watch, a quiet decision being made about who you were. The system had witnesses. Now, there were trade-offs. Sometimes that visibility protected you, a parent who could hear if something was wrong. Sometimes it controlled you, a community that decided who you were allowed to want. Proximity and witnesses didn't distribute safety evenly, but they distributed consequence universally. The system didn't ask which you needed, but the stakes were real. And when stakes are real, courage becomes a requirement. So here's the question that leads into what changed. What happens when friction disappears and leaving becomes effortless? Now look at the light. Back then it was warm, incandescent, porch light, kitchen light, living room window. It made the world feel like a room you were inside. Now it's the cool blue of a screen, a private glow, just you and your thumb. That privacy was a liberation. It gave people control. It gave people safety. It let you decide who had access to you. But systems work in two directions. When you remove the friction of entry, you also remove the friction of exit. There are no witnesses in a DM. There's no long walk to the door, no living room window, no parent answering the phone. You can end something with the same motion you use to silence a notification. No confrontation, no next day, no shared air. And sometimes that quiet is mercy. But it also changes what commitment costs. Because when leaving has no cost, staying starts to lose its weight. Back then, even the hard parts had a geography. Heartbreak happened somewhere, on a front step under a porch light, in a hallway with your books in your arms, in a parking lot where you sat too long before starting the car. The world witnessed it. The place held it with you. Now, the screen doesn't change. The same blue light that brings you close is the blue light that ends it. No door to walk away from, no long drive home, no room that looks different afterward. Just you in the dark, holding the whole feeling by yourself. And that's the trade that matters most. We made contact easier, but we also made it easier to leave without consequence. And when leaving is effortless, staying stops feeling like a decision. I'm not saying back then was better. I'm saying it was training. Training to sit with discomfort, to tolerate not knowing, to show up even when it felt hard, to stay present in a room with someone who'd seen you fail. We didn't become those things on purpose. We became them because the world didn't give us another option. Now the option exists. You can reach anyone, leave anytime, disappear without explanation. That's not wrong. It's just different. But if something feels missing, this is part of what it is. We stopped practicing being stuck with each other. And somewhere in that stuckness was where we learned to stay. That's what this channel is about. Not what we lost, but how things used to work, and what they quietly trained in us while we weren't paying attention. Dating, money, childhood, work, risk. All of it operated under different rules back then, rules we never wrote down because we didn't have to. We just lived inside them. If this landed for you, there's more here. Different systems, same question underneath all of them. What happens when the friction disappears? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.